Welcome back to State of Affairs. Now, recent tension between the U.S. and Russia have some using a term many haven't heard in a while, the Cold War. But is that where we're headed? I posed the question to UT historian and professor Jeremi Suri, who understands global politics and can explain things better than just about anyone else. Have a look. The year was 1985, and Sylvester Stallone's fourth hit Rocky film pitted the scrappy American icon against the scary Russian Drago.
It was one of the first movies I think I went to with my friends without my parents. And when Rocky knocks out Drago, everyone in the audience stands and cheers at a movie theater. And I remember thinking that was weird then also, right? But that gave one a sense of the American-Russian rivalry.
It's a subject University of Texas professor Jeremi Suri has studied for years as a published historian and expert in foreign relations and global politics. In the 1980s, it seemed like just about every Hollywood bad guy hailed from the Soviet Union, but the Cold War's big screen battles reflected real fears.
I had grown up as a child of the Reagan years. In the early 1980s, I remember buying Time magazine, Reagan and Soviet leader Yuri Andropov were on the cover because it looked like they were going to blow up the world.
In the aftermath of World War II, the threat Russia could convince the world that Soviet communism was a better alternative to capitalist democracy deeply worried American leaders. And the threat either could sterilize the earth with thermonuclear weapons scared the pants off just about everyone. But Suri says it was the battle between competing ideas of government that made the Cold War unique.
Vietnam's a great example of that. There was never anyone in the U.S. government who believed that Vietnam was crucial to the American economy or crucial to American material interests. It was always ideological, that Vietnam was part of showing the communists that we could offer an alternative to what Ho Chi Minh and the Soviets and the Chinese were offering.
By the 1980s, the stagnant, inefficient, and increasingly corrupt Soviet economy was in crisis, and reforms under progressive President Mikhail Gorbachev failed.
In his effort to open up the system and expose corruption, people exposed their hatred of communism. And so Gorbachev opened the system to reform. The reforms undermined what was left of communist authority, and the old guys, this is really important, the old generation of communist leaders died off.
After the fall of the Berlin Wall and dissolution of the Soviet Union, Suri was one of many Westerners anxious to see the new Russia for himself.
We were excited that Russia was going to become a democracy, it was going to become part of Europe, it was going to become part of the Western world as we knew it. This was exciting. Russians are so well educated. They had so much to offer. The sad story was that the old Communist Party bosses and their sons took control of all the resources.
Men such as President Boris Yeltsin, under whom the Russian economy cratered while corruption and crime skyrocketed. As Yeltsin's health failed, Suri says he looked to a successor that would spare his family from retribution.
So they turned to Vladimir Putin, who was well respected within the former KGB, as an effective administrator, as someone who was very knowledgeable, and someone who could run a tight ship. And he established a new authoritarianism.
Putin had his own idea about why the Soviet Union collapsed.
He believes the West took advantage of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was weak, and they had a reformist leader in Mikhail Gorbachev, that we exploited them at a weak moment. What most historians would say, historians in Europe, in the United States, even historians in Russia, who aren't necessarily controlled by Putin, what they would argue is actually what we saw was the fizzling out of a failed economy.
Putin's strategy was to seize the economy, along with the media and universities, and begin effectively pumping Russian oil and gas into international markets.
The cash went into Putin's government and Putin's friends, and they distributed it to their friends, and distributed enough to the people at large that people felt things were getting better. They also used military force to make the society safer.
It may not have made Russia the freest society, but it made Putin popular.
To think of Russia under Putin, think of Sicily under the mafia. He is a mafia leader, and the mafia runs the state, and for many people, that's a pretty good deal. If you're on the right side, you get a little bit of money, you get safety, you get protection, and it's better than what you had in the 1990s.
And Putin's Strongman Act brought something else many Russians missed.
They were a great power. They were up there with the United States and Western Europe, and they became meaningless, especially with the rise of China. And Putin has, with his belligerent policies, with his antics, with his thumbing his nose at the United States, he makes Russians feel like they matter again.
Flash forward to now. After rebounding under Putin's control, Russia's economy is once again headed the wrong direction amid international sanctions and declining oil prices.
Authoritarians, strongmen, can do a lot in the short run, but they produce disaster in the long run.
This year, Putin sparked an unprovoked international crisis with efforts to annex the Crimean Peninsula of Ukraine, a nation with a long and complex history with its eastern neighbor.
I think Putin is getting more and more desperate. And that's what makes this very dangerous.
The U.S. and Europe responded with crippling economic sanctions, and in a December speech, the Russian president evoked the specter of the Cold War.
I think the differences with the Cold War outweigh the similarities, but the similarities are striking. One is Russian leaders are defining themselves in opposition to what they see as a threatening West.
Add to that a brutal authoritarian regime.
And third, we're seeing the quasi-fascist use of military symbolism to compensate for empty stomachs. Sorry, Russian people, you can't live as well as you'd like, but look how strong we are.
But unlike the Cold War, Suri says Putin isn't offering an alternative system that threatens the Western way of life.
There really isn't anyone in any part of the world today who says, you know, the solution to our problems in Thailand is to be more like Russia. That's just not the case. Whereas there were activists in Vietnam in the 1950s who thought that. Where he might miscalculate, as others have miscalculated before, is he might underestimate the resolve of the United States and Europe to get involved with defending a country, a small country near him.
Yet change could be on the Russian horizon.
I wouldn't give this regime decades. It might have years, but it's not going to be here forever.
And unlike the last revolution, a new generation of young Russians living and learning abroad today have the nerve and know-how to make the essentials of a free press, real elections, and fair courts a reality at home.
They can do this. We just need to help them to do this. And I think the fair criticism of us is that at the end of the Cold War, we didn't do enough of that. Not because we didn't want to help them, we didn't know how to. They will determine the future of Russia, not Vladimir Putin.